Thank you so much for your patience. I'm really glad that we're all here today. It feels, I just have to say, I'm going to say this a little bit off the cuff. I'll take off my mask. It feels really good to be in person together again. It's hard to do, it's strange, but I'm glad it's possible for us. So this little bag, it'll be coming off and on between readers. I'm just going to warn you, we'll have somebody doing that, so it'll be a little strange, but that'll allow the readers to take off their masks. So here we are, we're here for Africana Dantes. I have to say it's been a pleasure working with David Wallace and Herman Beavers to think about the shape of this program and to bring it all together. A lot of people were involved, and Writers House was really honored to be the home for this event. Before we get going, I want to give a special thank you to Ben Cruzling, Tracy Morris, Natalie Anderson, who are all sharing work tonight. So welcome to all of you. And thanks to all of you for coming and for wearing your masks and for filling out the paperwork and signing the forms and being willing to deal with all that, sorting our tech stuff. You know, whew, we're here, we're doing it. At the end of the portion of the event where we're all talking, we will have some food. So if you're comfortable with that, you are welcome to stay. And at that point, people can take off their masks. So if you're not comfortable with that, you're welcome to take some food and go. But we do hope that you're willing to stick around for a little bit of food so we can chat a little bit after the performances. I'm going to hand the microphone over to David Wallace. But before I do that, I want to tell you that he's been at Penn since 1996. Is that right? I'm happy that what we get tonight will tell you something about his commitment to poetry as a performance mode, poetry as something that we should enjoy and think about, and also his commitment to thinking about the interactions of literature on a global level, how things connect through time, how things connect nationally, internationally. I'm excited for that. So please help me welcome David Wallace.
So put on my new doggy bag. Is that how it begins?
Yeah, well.
Oh, will you do that for me? Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you so much. It's a very strange ritual, isn't it? Yeah. So hello, everybody, and welcome to this program on Africana Dantes. The weather's cooperating with our alfresco planning just about, right? It's just about the right temperature, so that's great. As Jessica said, I'm David Wallace, Professor of English at Penn and also member of the Center for Italian Studies. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this program on behalf of Kelly Writers House and our sponsors, the Center for Africana Studies, the Center for Italian Studies, the Creative Writing Program, English, Comparative Literature, and the Collegium Institute. Dante Alighieri died 700 years ago this month, and death for Dante was especially significant as a poet of the afterlife. I often think about Dante on his deathbed, wondering, is it going to be just like I said it was? You know, an extraordinary thought. And this 700th anniversary has been celebrated all over the world. There was an especially compelling webinar last year on African American reception of Dante, put out by Trinity College, Hartford, featuring composer and jazz musician Sherman Irby, poet Carl Phillips, and philosopher and public intellectual Cornel West. And this can be found online on YouTube and is well worth finding. Cornel West begins his very personal account of Dante by asking the question, what does it mean to be human? And in current circumstances, how do we mobilize sources and resources to reckon with forms of catastrophe? To mark the 700th anniversary here at Penn, we've invited a group of distinguished poets and poet performers to give us their personal takes, reactions, or inspirations on any aspect of Dante. They received no more specific brief than this. And so it's with a real sense of anticipation that we welcome our poets to Penn: Benjamin Cruzling, Nathalie Anderson, and Tracy Morris. Herman Beavers will give a formal introduction and welcome shortly. And I'm sorry to say that Michelle Nazadi Keita won't be able to join us for health reasons. We wish her well, and we hope to see her soon here at Kelly Writers House. African American writers and public intellectuals have long taken intense and particular interest in Dante. For them, an earlier anniversary was of special importance, that of 1865, marking the 600th anniversary of Dante's birth. A new monument to Dante was unveiled in Florence, celebrating not just Dante, but Italy's newfound independence and unification. Alfred Douglas, who kept a bust of Dante in his library, followed the Italian liberation struggle through his newspaper, The North Star, likening the resistance to Austrian rule to a war against slavery. 100 years later, in another time of revolutionary ferment, Amiri Baraka was pondering social relations in his hometown of Newark, just up the road. His 1966 book, The System of Dante's Hell, begins provocatively, competitively, with the line, "But Dante's hell is heaven." Gloria Naylor's novel, Linden Hills, from 1985, sees two young male poets descend a Dantean architecture while waging war on black middle-classness and the institutions that promise safe anchorage for its cultivation. Spencer Williams ends his amazing 1944 film, Go Down Death, by splicing into the 1911 Inferno made by the Milano Film Company. Sherman Irby is promising to follow up his recent jazz ballet, Overture to Dante, called Lost, with a future Paradiso. We have absolutely no idea what our poet performers will bring us this evening, but we're delighted that they've taken up our invitation and that you've all come. So now I'll hand over to my esteemed colleague in English and in Africana Studies and Faculty Director of Penn Civic House, Herman Beavers.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see that we have a turnout tonight. A quick word about, because I think David is being modest. A quick word about how this came about. Our colleague Emily Steiner, who is David's fellow medievalist, often has these programs that are built around Beowulf or some other medieval text. So she's asked me to participate several times, and I've written poems in response to what she offered as a kind of catalyst text. David reached out to me, it probably was last spring, and he said, what if we did that with Dante? And I said, that's a great idea. And it's a great idea, I think, because people tend to think of Africana studies as this hermetically sealed academic discipline. And in fact, as you suggest with Cornell West and Amiri Baraka, African American writers are interested, and African American scholars are interested in a wide variety of approaches and interfaces and dialogues and conversations. And so what I really love about the fact that we're doing this program is that, one, it's a collaboration whose time had come, but the other thing is that I hope that students seeing or hearing about this or viewing the program later will come to understand Africana studies as a space in which they can bring a variety of interests, even if they don't originate on the African continent or in the Black community per se. So at the risk of sounding self-congratulating, I want to really sort of mark this occasion as something that I hope happens more often in the future, which is Africana Studies collaborating with our colleagues in the Center for Italian Studies or Latino Studies or Asian American Studies. There are all kind of conversations to be had, and we should have them for reasons that this political moment makes clear. So without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce our readers for tonight. And so I'll introduce our first reader. Benjamin Cruzling is a writer and artist who works in both sound and language. The author of a book of poems, Glaring, which came out in 2020 from Wendy Subway, and a chapbook, Grapes, which came out in 2018, and a digital chapbook, I Have Too Much to Hide, Triple Canopy 2021. He received his MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is a PhD candidate in English at the CUNY Graduate Center, and he lives in Brooklyn. If that is not a Dante-esque space, I don't know what is. And so, please, welcome Benjamin Cruz.
Hello. I'm really excited to do this. Thank you so much for the gracious introduction and framing. I'm really excited to be reading with my co-readers. When I was invited to do it, I decided to approach it how I approach a lot of these things, which is to do something that's, I want to say entering, which is not quite right, but a bit of channeling and a bit of sort of mixing what I do with what I think not only Dante is doing, but Baraka is doing, and Baraka is a very important poet to me and also a troubling poet in a lot of ways. So I'm interested in reading Baraka and troubling Baraka, and reading myself and troubling myself, and thinking about maybe what Dante has to offer in those contexts. So what I'll mostly do is just kind of read straight through what I have to say. I think what I have to say will come through most clearly through the poetry, but I did want to read just a bit from Baraka's System of Dante's Hell, which David began to talk about. But this is from the very end of that book, where Baraka is kind of summarizing a bit of what he's tried to accomplish with it. He says, "What is hell? Your definitions. I am and was and will be a social animal. Hell is definable only in those terms. I can't get no place else it wouldn't exist." He goes on to say, "Hell in the head, the torture of being the unseen object and the constantly observed subject, the flame of social dichotomy split open down the center, which is the early legacy of the black man unfocused on blackness, the dichotomy of what is seen and taught and desired opposed to what is felt. Finally, God is simply a white man, a white idea in this society, unless we have made some other image which is stronger and can deliver us from the salvation of our enemies. For instance, if we can bring back on ourselves the absolute pain our people must have felt when they came onto this shore, we are more ourselves again and can begin to put history back in our menu and forget the propaganda of devils that they are not devils." What I think is interesting to me about Dante, and I suspect, though people have made different arguments about Baraka's interest, and he has his own thoughts, is a kind of suturing of suffering and meaning in a certain way. Or perhaps that's how Dante is instrumentalized, which is to say that suffering has a system that it can be interpreted and it can be mapped. And the Divine Comedy, the Inferno, is full of quite a lot of gross suffering, grotesque suffering, disturbing suffering, and it's quite a saturated text as well. It's kind of dripping with tears and, blood, fluid and rivers. And maybe it's in that spirit that I kind of want to proceed, and I might have more remarks as I go through it. "I fainted as if I had met my death, and then I fell, as a dead body falls. I hear the voice of the prophet in it, the libidinal economy of Christ's side wound, which ate the memory of intelligence up. Oh, I can take my mask off, I forget. It's lit. Which ate the memory of intelligence up, eats it. In the cold center of Brooklyn, where the consultants throw 1,000 parties and die 1,000,000 deaths, but they may never know, it's an attitude toward thingliness and livelihood, to the backs of others. It's an erotic relationship to Wallace Stevens, for example, which I can no more understand than sanction. That's fine, life is for living. If you unplug the lamp when you're there, you should plug it back in when you leave. But the redness of that life makes me shudder still, my skin hardens. I'm the one who weeps when the wind razors, the sirens pierce, and there is no guide. What Dante offers on the one hand is poetic justice, a litany of suffering sutured to meaning where, via moten, one runs from it and is still in it, but not alone and with divine sanction. God, come down to us to show us we're not alone, that our suffering matters, has matter, a mother, that our enemies will not rest in peace. The production of hell exposes a set of power relations. And while we steered across the stagnant channel, before me stood a sinner thick with mud, saying, "Who are you? Come before your time." And I to him, "I've come, but I don't stay. But who are you who have become so ugly?" He answered, "You can see, I'm one who weeps." So I thought of Baraka's knuckled, ugly, raging modernism in the system of Dante's hell, its punctuated box. Dennis Looney says Baraka uses Dante first to measure the growing distance between himself and European literature, then paradoxically to separate himself totally from it. But there's never really a separation. You have to breathe the air to say something against it, hell in the head, dead hard ground, violence against others, against oneself, against God, nature, and art, a rage against the terms of comprehension. Later, a realization from a different angle. The failure of all of us in here is staggering, and half our hearts and lives. But how did we get here, this tragedy clutching my speech and memory, our legacy as a people, we Africans in America? Dante writes, "Ah me, what wounds I saw upon their limbs, wounds new and old, wounds that the flames seared in. It pains me still as I remember it." Eduardo Galeano writes, "In the heavy dusk, the guards of the Inquisition took Juan from Maria's arms and threw him in jail because poisoned tongues said that he said, while listening to the gospel, 'Hey, all there is living and dying.'" We've got to do something to save the children. The real has that bad color now. My surprise was fluid, so bright when I discovered it. The sun gushed roughly down my forehead, lips, etc. The red flags cracked the black of the air. I thought kids in this climate with these ordinances, these bullets flying. But my blinds are shut. When attachment is stunned by punishment, the blinds just close themselves. My work in its troubled way is strewn about the room, and I hear, "This is America" from the apartment next door. My world is so ugly. But I'm beginning to like it as I look forward to its changing soon. Ours too, James confirms, is an age of propaganda. In my various educations, I had the shape of an idea about myself. Without money, hostile to confession. Doomed to the shallow knowledge of the narcotized, granite with arms up, elbows out, aflame, asphyxiated, rageful, colored, on the far side of domination. But when I said my life was ugly, I was wrong for what I meant by it. There's no place for that kind of clock punching, that confirmation. I was scrolling when I was thinking, words were hammering, then my mind was filled by the light on my face. The blue light, the black lightning. This year I'm thinking of wearing brighter colors, imagine. I'm a fun person, imagine. Demanding, imagine. Ever so sprayed by circumstance. So blood and carbon, so in my troubled way, superstitious, diseased. In my youth, it said, I suffered quite vigorously. Real color, big blinds, small after all, but rated. Playing at the heart of it, after all, was there all along. Art should always end in celebration. Wrong. You know, we don't understand what you mean by all this. I'm in my refractory period, taking issue with the under-theorized parts of my inheritance, diffusing my intent through this brittle environment, trying, through this spiral movement, to sustain life on Earth, sending myself to shades below. Dutch resistance fighter Freddie Overstegen says, yes, I've shot a gun myself and I've seen them fall. And what is inside us at such a moment, you want to help them get up. Now I'd moved past, they had come to see me or see what the great, sharp world could do. Their white teeth and mulatto brains to face the au fait houses of history. The beautiful middle class had formed, and I was to be a great figure, a giant among them. They followed with their eyes or listened to soft mouths spill my story out to give their wives. The fabric split, silk patterns run in the rain. What thoughts the God had for us, I trampled, lost my way, ran on what I was to kill the arc, the lovely pattern of our lives. From Baraka. It's a form of spiralism, point and counterpoint, weaving, rising. That action is still possible even in this conjuncture of evacuation, of no possibility, this quasi-vacuum that makes breathing touch and go. Beautiful morning, I'm paranoid in it, and I have told you this to make you grieve. The sea again closed over us. I'm in the West now I'm stressed out. I want to die in designer. Jeans for the nude of my legs to rest on. You want to know what I wear at home. A shirt of pure cotton, and I feel my life arrive. I meet myself in the mirror. I wear silk to the station and walk through a checkpoint of municipal law. I move toward Wall Street, past the federal courthouse, a wool sweater in midnight blue, a bed for my cotton shirt, cotton for the nude of my chest. I am caught in my condition. I am dwarfed by the courthouse as I walk downtown to meet you. I show no teeth, past the municipal checkpoints. Hair for the nude of my head, a hood. I'm on my way to see you, so I pass the guns and checkpoints, wearing blue and black, branded shoes and materials. Bone for the nude of my brain. We've hardly met. I go through the eyes of the city to reach you and spend some time. I'm covered in fabric. I ask what it does. My body has an unknown name, and the right shirt can make me throw it in the tall grass. I made a plan to see you, and I thought of who might see me in the middle of my life. In the checkpoint, I was all arms, all face. A quiet commercial played in my heart. Then I felt the most ecstatic panic. Hell is actual, and people with hell in their heads. But the pastoral moments in a man's life will also mean a great deal as far as his emotional references. One thinks of home or the other homes we have had, and we remember with love those things bathed in soft black light. The struggles away or toward this peace is hell's function. Wars of consciousness, antithetical definitions of feelings. Once as a child, I would weep for compassion and understanding, and hell was the inferno of my frustration. but the world is clearer to me now, and many of its features more easily definable. So I fell out with a friend. I said, "I'm proud of you." He said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "What's that missing? What's that ash on the skin of the film of this story about grass cooking, leaf crushing? What's that white strobe blasting appearances into my heart, talking to the skin of the air, asking, what are you about? That kind of gun wave, gun lean, gun warning, crisis call. That eschatological hemorrhaging from the skin of the image factory. The teacher in 8th grade who cried when Justin Timberlake counts his steps like a rated mathematician to distract from the war. What's pride in the States? I'm not an object, but it explains. My qualia speak, body talks, this rushing cascade feels good, so it's used. There's pleasure making right there, but I was so hurt by the idea. Between the day end and the destitute, running over the bridge to get sun, bread. It's a miracle of material, so I can explain it. There's no antisocial destination, jerking and scratching. The uprising actually exceeds reason. It transforms meaning, this orange burst in the air, the floodlights pulled down to the street, or this car sliding through outdoor dining. We can't just tap our veins for content when we haven't eaten what's needed. I fell out on the white sheet of the bed and depressed a hole in the world, brought back with ice, honey. I tried to re-blood myself. Flew home, but there's more than life to it. The burning precinct more than pleased me, pleased to enter my life from inside it and ask about the real horizon. But when he heard that, he lost patience, lost it. We have to look superheroism in the face and peel it off, not get shaved to pieces by fishbone, fish scale of propaganda. In the black night, it's nasal, aluminum, fucks your DNA up, makes the image wet with plasma and weeping. Hell on earth. Can feel that draining feeling, that lack, that light, that need to convince myself. I'm doing a very specific thing. It can't be extrapolated. I'm in my own zone and accompanying myself to its bright black edge. Demon hours, carnival hours. C says, I love life. Anything can happen. I ask the black night, please, give me a form to rest in, a veil of tears through which I can conceive of your body. It's a flip, it's a way of not committing self-impalement. It's a draining procedure. Little starlight comes, sunlight warms the room, this ecstasy of heat by which our skin perceives light, a bit of radiation. I thought we were done with all that, but we're never done with it. A gate screams on the street, and a man screams with it. But trying to do that one dance, I think my back broke. Exactly. I saw myself get up, and I saw myself stagger. It's dark outside on this semi-public street, and there's a weight on my ankle, 100 pounds, 200. Thanks.
It's my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Natalie Anderson. Nat and I have known one another for a very long time. And sometimes I like to think she's the president of my fan club, of which she's the only member. But she's an absolutely incredible poet, librettist, educator, who's been working in Philadelphia for many years. Her books of poetry include Following Fred Astaire, Crawlers, Quiver, Stain, and the chapbook Held and Firmly Bound, which is one of the most incredible books of poems I have ever read. Maybe Nat will talk about it, but it was a life-changing book. And I'm prone to hyperbole, but I'm not doing the book justice by calling it that. Her poems have appeared in such journals as Atlanta Review, Double Take, Natural Bridge, The New Yorker, Nimrod, and Plume. And she's authored libretti for 5 operas in collaboration with Philadelphia composer Thomas Whitman. She also manages a listserv, Lit Philly, which I think might be how I actually met you, Nat. She was a Pew Fellow in 1993, and wonderfully, she has just retired from Swarthmore College, where she taught in the English department and the program in creative writing for many years. In fact, the other time I may have met you was when I was out at Swarthmore to do one of the honors exams. But she's an absolutely wonderful colleague and friend, and so it's my great pleasure to introduce Natalie Anderson.
Well, I'm abashed. That was really, really lovely. I guess I want to start off by thanking you all for being here tonight, and to say it's really strange to speak of a return to hell as a pleasure, but I have enjoyed working on this project tremendously. And I just realized I have on my sunglasses. Oh, it's so bright. I want to thank Herman not only for that introduction, but also for suggesting me for this evening's project, and David Wallace for inviting me, all of the sponsoring departments, and of course, Jessica and Heidi from the Kelly Writers House. It's exhilarating and it's daunting to be reading with Benjamin and Tracy Morris. And I want to give a shout out also to Nzadi Keita, who really hoped to be with us tonight, and it's really too bad that she can't be here. So I'll start off with a few words of introduction and then read these poems. As I have shared the poems that I've written with some of my friends over the past weeks, most people have responded first by saying that it's been 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years since they last read Dante. As it happens, that would not be true for me because I teach T.S. Eliot, and Eliot loves Dante. And so I've read a little Dante, exactly the same little bit of Dante every year for years and years. And that means that my Dante is Eliot's Dante. The passages that arrest him grip me too, probably because I was instructed to be gripped by reading Eliot. For example, the whirlwind of lovers punished for their lust, or the beloved author who, even in hell, runs like he's racing for the green cloth at Verona, and runs like the one who wins, not like the one who loses. While I see Dante through Eliot, the translation I grew up on is John Ciardi's, and I want to acknowledge my indebtedness not only to his vision of the Inferno, but also most particularly to this book, which is a compendium of translations by contemporary poets. It's put together by Daniel Halpern with an introduction by James Merrill, quite appropriately, I guess, or Visiting the Dead. I recommend it really wholeheartedly. I also drew on translations, a 1949 translation by Dorothy L. Sayers, who's better known as the author of the Lord Peter Wimsey mystery novels, and to a recent version by the Belfast poet Kieran Carson. And I also reread the Vita Nuova in a translation by Barbara Reynolds. So I got obsessed by this project, and I wrote 8 poems. They're mostly really small poems, and I'm just going to plunge into them. They don't have titles. I'll just read straight through. So 1, entering the inferno. I thought to find my Charleston forebears there. Pity them, their benightedness, profit by their punishment, measure against them my obvious enlightenment. Any damned fool might have warned me that's not how it works in hell. I mean, isn't the whole point of the dark wood that you're on your own there? And the point of Lethe, however it reflects on you, you'll burn to forget it. 2, disappointed. What my stepmother used to say before she belted me. Oh, and this will hurt me worse, her open hand. No wonder I grew up dubious, recalcitrant, irreligious. When Dante says the so-called God of love requites our earthly pleasure with a battering, with mud crammed down the throat, forgive me, I don't see the loving. But I've seen disappointment. I've seen true disappointment. Say, when a boy I've taught expects me to greet him kindly and with love, and the other teachers say he's backslid, and I look stern, speak coldly, as I've been taught I ought to do, and see the light fall off his face. Understand, I'm not confessing. My shames aren't your business. But yes, I see myself, and yes, I'm often disappointed. 3, traversing the inferno, I feared to find my grandams there, white Southern women both, and blinkered by it, hobbled by it, though from them I learned how to be conscious, how to take responsibility, how to be kind. Never ones to run from anything, but I see them running now, still hampered by their habits, their habiliments, their habitations, yet shedding all that, choosing now to strip it off, to drop it, shred by shred by shred. Here a frayed thread, there a hair, a chip, a grit, a smut, a soot, a splinter, an unexamined odium, an unconsidered animus, slow-paced still and still deluded. But I want to think they're running, as I want to think that I am also, like they're running for the green cloth at Verona, and one leaden foot lifted, then the other, like they still think they could win. 4, I always thought I'd end up in the whirlwind, having spun there oblivious for so long, riding the loop-de-loop, riding the tilt-a-whirl, riding the wild one, owie, a leaf in the current, a love in every wind. So many nights winding myself around another body, holding on tight, drunk on infatuation, the dipsy, ditzy, daisy, faster than a roller coaster, riding the lightning, riding the thunderhead, riding the cyclone. A climber groping for every hand or toe hold, clutching out, gripping in, tightening my cling. And every kiss a little longer, every swanky Valentino dip a little stronger. Such whirls, such sweetheart twirls, air steps. And the whip crack, the butterfly swoon, shoulder slides, revolving doors. Even in dreams, I'm weightless on that wind, riding the ring racer, riding the boulder dash, riding the shivering timbers, open-mouthed and screaming wild, clutching, grasping. Starlings in their seething murmurations, all my partners long since spun away. Love like yours will surely hey, hey. Part 5, and this one is longer. It's kind of a sweet. Yeah. When Vanni Fucci, better known as the Beast, gloats in hell over the coming coup in Florence, where every white will stagger, every white will fall. He doesn't mean what we might think he means. These are white Guelphs, men of Dante's faction. Whatever once defined them, it surely wasn't skin. Yet how strange it is, and strangely apt, to hear that whites will get comeuppance, get what's coming to us, what even a beast thinks we'll deserve. When Vanni Fucci breaks that news to Dante, he intends his words to sting and says so. May you suffer. May it break your heart. May you die of very grief. And we know Dante suffers, exiled from all he loves, condemned if ever he returns, soured on his own party. What can he do but write about it? Who's in hell? Beasts who ignore the good of intellect, beasts who abandon civic reason for self-consumption. Fucci. Ah, the long revenge. I know zilch about Guelphs, white or black, but of course I root for Dante. Turns out his side favored artists over banks, populists over Pope, my kind of folk, I think. So their expulsion seems, at least from here, a catastrophic loss, a loss of artistry, civility, of civic dialogue, of choice. Abandoned intellect, abandoned reason. Dante, I've been grieving too. How strange it is, and strangely apt, to realize we've woken up in hell. Florence, rejoice. Your eagle wings have flown so many straight to their perdition. So Dante snarked before he learned that many living men, Florentines he took to be living, were being worn by demons as demon puppets, proxies in the living world, while they themselves were steeping in hell's frozen piss. And did you hear he witnessed there among the damned a yellow topknot, tossed and snarled by Satan's winging wind, and gleaming spurious within the ice like straw in glass? 6. I always thought I'd end up in the dark, having lain there oblivious for so long. I see myself baffled, addled, haggard, rambling, and this to me is hell, the shattered mind, the flickering awareness. So why is it I'm always courting darkness, always dozing, always slug-a-bed come Monday morning? Why so lax and lagging? Thus Virgil chivied Dante on his last legs and wheezing, having scaled hell's walls. You layabout, you lounger. You won't get anywhere lazing around like that. How do you think I got where I am? Not from sleeping in. Would you leave no more of yourself behind than froth at the shoreline, ripples in the wind? Dante hears, gets moving. Me, I roll over, clench my eyes shut, pretend I haven't heard a thing. This next part, 7, is also more like a suite. It's longer, and it's referencing the Vita Nuova. In his dream, Dante wakes to find his heart gone from his side. Ego dominus tuus, says the one who holds it, grips it, crushes it, which is to say, I'm your new master. new master. No need to specify the dread, the terror of that inexorable, unknown hand. Love comes to Dante in his dream, holding out and cradling his lost heart, says, "Now I'm your master." If love's the master, is the mastering still a threat, or a consolation, or an education, or an ecstasy? Dante Alighieri, slave to love. By the time he reaches paradise, he sees love differently. The smile of all creation, the symphony, the dance that moves the sun and other stars. But was that love always this love, identically? I've been so often mastered by love, it's like a hymn remastered, overmastered, my harmonics shifting, veering within an hour from him to hum to him. When we first meet a crucial poem, Eliot says, there's shock and surprise, there's even terror, ego dominus tuus. He might as well say this, as Dante says when he sees his lost love again. Hardly a drop of blood in my body does not shudder. I know the tokens of the ancient flame. When Yeats looks in the mirror, he sees someone else's eyes, and that's a terror too, ego dominus tuus. Who's speaking when you think you're speaking? What demon, what forebear lives on in your tongue? All that a man most lacks, and it may be dreads, our rhythm shudders, Yeats said. Dominus. The Romans used this word when they meant sir, when they meant schoolmaster or guildmaster, when they meant arbiter or arbitrator. The master of a feast, the host, the entertainer, a proprietor, a theater manager, employer of actors or of gladiators. Grounded in the word for house, the master of a residence, or else to dominate, domesticate, or tame, the master of its servants or its slaves. I'm ever an apprentice, sir, to poetry. I seek to master craft, time, self, guilt, history, envy, love, chance, change. Ego dominus tuus. What rends my heart? Who calls me out? This is my last part, and it's referencing these translators that I used, that I drew on. When I started doing this, I thought it would be really just a kind of a collage of quotations that I appreciated, and then I found that it had more of a narrative. Leaving the Inferno, I hoped to add up what I learned among those Dorothy Sayers called the damnified, those Kieran Carson sees as wastrels of themselves, those W.S. Merwin annotates thus, each one wraps himself in what burns him. But I'm with Deborah Diggs, I'm afraid to move my mouth. I'm with Sayers, pity unhearts me so. Yes, like Carson, I feel those arrows, I mean sorrows, for their points were barbed with pity. I understand hell's principle, concentred all in self, wound up in self, self knotted by the self that binds them. The damned cannot unwind, and the self they spun is thus the self they're punished by. Myself am hell, my taste was me. We were men once, says Charles Wright, and now we are underbrush. A proper brooch, says Sayers, for such a brazen breast. There's more. Now he was a pot, says Susan Mitchell, boiling over with dirty schemes. A little reptile, says Carson, black as a peppercorn, sharp as a pair of shears. But who can shear themselves or bite apart that binding thread? Who even sees the thread, so deep the damasking, so thickly, so distractingly embroidered? I know I keep more self than I let go. Disappoint myself, excuse myself. I'll let Cynthia McDonald have the last word here. Why did you hoard it? Why did you throw it away? Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have a 10 minutes break. And then we'll bring Tracy Morris up to take us to the next level. Don't go too far. But we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. not have to be up on stage and can be distanced. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes roughly for questions and conversation, comments. So I'll stay up here and I'll wrangle things a little bit, but I don't think I'll have to. But please, or you can take the mic down there with you. So, questions, comments, responses, riffs. Yes. Oh, yeah, great.
I just, that was great. Thank you so much. I had a question because I wasn't sure I heard you at the beginning, but in the second part, when you were reading with the sound, those were all Longfellow quotes, or was some of it your work?
Translation of different parts. Usually it's mostly the first and second cantos of each section, and then the last canto of each section, and the last line from the first and third parts.
Thanks.
Other questions? Yes, David.
I'd like to ask Benjamin, thank you very much for all of the fantastic, wonderfully energizing presentations. Thank you. Benjamin, Baraka has a kind of tensioning between Newark and New York, doesn't he? And I wonder, do you feel a tensioning between Brooklyn and New York in your poetic and the way you live and the way you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio originally, so if I have a tension, it's probably more between there and living in New York now, which I have for about 12 years. Cincinnati is an interesting place, you know. I feel like it's something of a border town in a certain way, as a free state over the river from a slave state. And so I think Cincinnati kind of maintains that in-betweenness, which comes with maybe a heightened level of racial tension, one might say. I think as recently as 1999, the Klan used to still put crosses up in the Fountain Square downtown. And so that's kind of in my mind, you know, I think coming from a place that's sort of violently, to this day, racially segregated, as most places still are in a number of ways. And also it's in the Midwest and comes, you know, at a particular period of prosperity and less prosperity now. So thinking about that kind of being now in New York, which is sort of like the imperial core in a certain sense, and the financial capital, which has its own histories of segregation and you know, different waves of racial violence. So I'm always kind of thinking these things together. I could say more of it. That's my initial answer. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Other questions, comments?
I can talk a lot, so anyway, I guess my question, first of all, I'm really sorry to have missed Ben's portion of this.
It's all good.
You say that. But anyway, I guess my question is, again, for Tracy Morris, which is just, I'm really interested in the sort of, you know, the approach that you have, right, to writing your poems to these very contemporary music videos. And I guess I just wonder about what that's like for you and what goes into selecting both, like, from, like, I guess if Dante is the source material or the inspiration for what you're writing, how that pairing works for you. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there for now.
Well, I think like Ben, I'm thinking also about the subjectivity of what Baraka explored in terms of what hell actually is and what is purgatory for Black people, in the context of Dante talking about these things in terms of Italian politics, as Natalie mentioned. And it's subjective. I also just think it's such foundational text that our idea of heaven, hell, and purgatory are fundamentally affected by Dante clearly. But for these particular selections, it's actually kind of funny because I originally planned to do them in reverse order, starting with Kanye West. But as I went back to my Dante, I was like, oh, no. It's 3 sections, she's Beatrice, it all becomes very, very clear. And I just thought, I think the interesting thing about, I had a couple of things I was deciding with working with clips, and I had another one that I was intrigued to use, which Ben actually mentioned, which was This Is America by Childish Gambino, because there's a point at the end of that video when the camera pans up and it's sort of like the sunken place, and then it goes up to him running away from like racist white people, like a fugitive slave. And I was really tempted to use that, but I was like, that's not heaven, or one could perceive of it maybe as a level above, but not heaven. And then I was just like, but the extremity of like, when one gets to heaven, what's the existential crisis, or what does that mean? And I think the Kanye West video, which is one of my favorite videos ever, it's just absolutely riveting every time I see it, is like, in the context of the construction of white heaven, what does it mean for a black person to be there? And even his construction is dealing with, heavy is the head that wears the crown parts, but also, a lot of beautiful women, sort of naked. But then they're coming for his head. This is his idea of heaven, and yet they're still coming to him. So I feel like, it's kind of like this irresolvability. I felt the same way about using F.K. Twigs as Beatrice, because I was like, she's this huge, this important muse, right? But she doesn't. I can't keep doing with the 2 mask thing. I can't really. But she's very, Dante saw her twice. Once he was 9, and because she lives so large in his imagination, and she plays a pivotal role in the Divine Comedy. But it's like, I'm giving her room. That was my thing. Purgatory in the middle is where Beatrice gets agency and she has more room. So the poem is more minimalist, and F.K. Twigs is, I don't know if she's positioning herself as Beatrice, but I think that she really works well that way. And I wasn't going to have it an all-male exercise. I wanted to flip some of the gender norms. And the last thing I'll just say about Lil Nas X is just so, I just can't believe this young man. He's 22. He's 22. And he started with like old country road or whatever that is, Old Town Road. And then this is the next thing, And I'm like, he's so unapologetic. He's so unapologetic in all kinds of ways. And so, he's very much indebted to FKA Twigs' Cellophane, and he has said that. And FKA Twigs kind of shouted him out for acknowledging her video as well as what he's doing in terms of queerness and all of that. I'm just like kind of amazed by this young person. He's 22 and he just rules. And the way that he presents sexuality, black fierceness, black resiliency, everything is so methodical. From the use of denim, I'm like, yeah, that's indigo dyeing, that's the whole thing, people being kidnapped to do indigo. It's like so thorough. And I was just, so anyway, I wanted to put him at the apex because there was so much going on, but I was like, him descending into hell with all of the stuff that he's doing, like as a person, it underlies the unjustness not only of the system, but even of Dante's construction. Like, people can't go to heaven because they died before Jesus was born. I'm just like, well, how is that fair? I get why Dante said it as a Christian, but I'm just like, well, wait a minute. Like, exploring the idea of inherent imbalance. And I just said, yeah, that's how we can kick it off. But I also think the outrageous sexuality, his vanquishing of the devil, is a kind of African American trope as racism writ large, but also just the way that people just decide they're not going to be destroyed. So there's a lot of reasons, and I'm blah, blah, blah. But I'm really excited about these artists, and I think they're in conversation with each other in a sort of super textual way. Sorry.
I wanted to pose a question to all three of our readers tonight. You know, as David and I kicked around the idea of doing this program, you know, what is obviously manifestly in the foreground is the idea of intertextuality. But listening to your three performances, one of the things I wanted to hear from all of you about is the idea of how the intertextuality with Dante in our present moment, or Dante and other writers like Baraka, how did that impact your approach to idiom in your works?
Maybe I'll start, although I'm not sure what I'm going to say. One thing that was instructive for me was reading this version by Kieran Carson. And the reason I bring that up is that he's interested in the rhyme. He's interested in making sure that he follows the terzo rima. But that, for him, is like a permission to do something outrageous at the rhyme. And so there's lots of slang. There's lots of a little Three Stooges whap, whap, whap in your face that most of the texture of it wouldn't lead you to expect. So it's like a decently serious translation with cartoon surprises. And so that was an encouragement to me to bring in Buddy Holly, or I like the idea of the phrase that someone doesn't expect. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I realized when I was making this that artists had to be heard, you know, partly because I didn't want to just feel like appropriative, but the other thing is, for those who are familiar with these videos, you're going to start hearing the sound anyway. So I'm like, why fight that when I can just say you're going to hear them the second time? So I originally planned to put the Dante translations on the screen at certain points and to have them scroll up, but I was worried that the technology was too complicated, and I'm not adept at technology at all, so I couldn't help. But then I found like it was okay to do the flash, because I've listened to these songs so many times that I know where the pauses are, and sometimes it was competing, but sometimes it wasn't, and I think that that's okay, because idiomatic speech sometimes is in sync and sometimes it is competing. And it also just reinforced the idea that colloquialism that was considered low was the thing that Dante revolutionized with this work. So it just made sense to have a contemporary relationship. It's kind of like what you described.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting being invited to this event, because I feel like on the one hand, even if one were to say condemn Dante, which wasn't my impulse, part of the labor is authorizing the canon just by engaging with it in a certain way. So it's an interesting tension, at the same time as I think Baraka was deeply invested in understanding the inheritance of the West and making the art that he was making. And so in his book, Blues People, he talks about blues and jazz, and also the fact that European music is interested perhaps in like a pure artifact of sound, whereas Black American music sort of ruptures that sound in a number of ways that might be illegible to white critics or something like that. So I think for intertextuality, it's interesting to me to, you know, as Tracy does, for example, bring in registers from other kind of art forms, have other voices come in to kind of rupture the pure artifact of, you know, this thing that's called a poem or the speech I have on the page, like make the different ways that it's impinged upon always kind of visible and active. So I tried to do that a bit, and I think Baraka does that in a lot of ways that are really exciting to me and troubling too, but yeah.
Thank you all for that. We have time for one more question. Just a devastatingly persuasive. Oh, there.
I could ask another one. But if anyone,
No, please.
I've asked like a million.
I don't know if this is a fully formed question, but I was wondering about the materialism or the material and the materialism and the anxiety in your poems, Ben, and if that was born out of a Brooklyn-based tale or like out of something relating to your reading into whatever it is you're.
Sure, yeah. I'll try to give a quick answer. But I think reading Dante, who was, condemning some of his political enemies in the text, it felt important to me to be politically active in what I was doing in a contemporary way and to kind of try in some ways to analyze the current sort of order we're in. Part of that, is capitalism in a number of ways, and I think being surrounded by very gross kind of inequality on a number of levels. At the same time as what I like about Dante's text is its saturation, its emotional saturation, the saturation of language as well. And so, materialism is kind of seductive in that sense. Like, they're very beautiful things. And maybe that produces attention also. So there's a lot of friction maybe in what I'm doing, and it has to do with what we just talked about, and also this kind of agonizing, trying to make a way out of no way sort of situation. And I have a lot more to say, but I have to think more about it. So thank you for that question.
Okay, well, we have refreshments in the dining room, in the front, because we're eating outside. So why don't we repair to the food and we can continue conversation. Thank you all for coming out.